day my daughter handed the judge a USB drive, my wife of 31 years looked at it like she was seeing a ghost. She wasn't wrong. I'm 63 years old. I spent the better part of 4 decades working in commercial roofing. Not glamorous work. Not the kind of thing you brag about at dinner parties, but honest work that paid honest money. I started as a laborer hauling bundles up ladders when I was 19. By the time I was 40, I owned the company. By the time I was 55, we had 12 trucks and contracts with 3 hospital systems in the state of Ohio. I'm not saying this to sound impressive. I'm saying this because it matters to understand what I built and what was being taken from me while I slept. My wife's name is Nadine. We met in 1992 at a friend's backyard cookout in Columbus. She was 26, working as a dental receptionist, laughing at something somebody said near the cooler. I walked over because I couldn't think of a reason not to. We were married 14 months later. I thought she was the best decision I ever made. For a long time, maybe she was. We had 2 kids. Our son Brendan moved to Portland about 8 years ago, works in tech, calls on Sundays. Our daughter Iris, she stayed closer, lives about 40 minutes from us, teaches high school history, married a good man named Craig. Iris has always been the one who paid attention. When she was a teenager, she used to catch me on small inconsistencies. Not in a cruel way, just she noticed things. I used to tease her that she should have been a prosecutor. I should have listened to my own jokes. The first sign something was wrong came in the spring of 2019. I was reviewing our quarterly tax estimate with our accountant, a man I've used for 20 years, and he flagged something. A transfer of $47,000 out of our joint savings account that he didn't have a corresponding record for. I wasn't alarmed at first. I assumed it was a timing issue, a wire that hadn't cleared, something mundane. I mentioned it to Nadine that evening and she said it was for the kitchen renovation we'd been discussing. We had been discussing a kitchen renovation. I let it go. But the kitchen never got renovated. I didn't push. That's the part I have to be honest about. I didn't push because I trusted her completely and because by that point in our marriage I had handed her the daily management of our household finances. Not because I was lazy. I ran a business with annual revenues over $4 million. But at home, Nadine handled the bills, the accounts, the investments. She'd been doing it for years. I saw the monthly statements, but I didn't read them the way I should have. I saw numbers, and I assumed they were right. That's how it works, I've come to understand, not in a dramatic movie villain way. It works gradually, quietly, the way water gets into a foundation. By the time you see the damage, it's been happening for years. In the fall of that same year, Iris came to visit for a weekend. Craig was out of town for work, so it was just the 2 of us and Nadine, which was nice. Saturday evening, Nadine went to bed early. She'd been having what she called migraines, though I noticed they tended to appear when certain conversations started. Iris and I sat on the back porch with the last of a bottle of Cabernet, and she asked me, in a careful, measured way that told me she'd been thinking about it for a while, whether everything was okay between me and her mother. I said of course it was. She nodded slowly and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Dad, I've noticed some things. I don't want to overstep. But I've noticed some things and I want you to know that if you ever need to talk, you can talk to me. About anything." I didn't understand what she was telling me. I smiled and said I appreciated it, and we finished the wine and went inside. I understand now. What I didn't know at that point was that Iris had already been paying attention for over a year. She hadn't said anything to me because she didn't have anything concrete, just a feeling. The particular feeling a daughter gets when her mother starts behaving like a woman with a plan. Little things. Nadine making phone calls in the car instead of the house. Nadine becoming very protective of her laptop. Nadine occasionally letting slip references to things, a trip, a property, a name, and then immediately changing the subject. Iris started keeping notes. Not an investigation, she told me later. She wasn't trying to spy on her mother or build a case. She was a daughter who loved her father and was scared of what she was starting to understand, and she didn't know what to do with the fear except write it down. Dates, times, things she'd overheard, questions that didn't have answers. She kept it in a notebook she bought specifically for that purpose, a plain green composition notebook she kept in the drawer of her desk at school. Over the following months, she started doing something else. When she visited, which she did often, every few weeks, she began recording conversations. Not secretly wired, nothing dramatic. She used a phone, which she kept in her cardigan pocket or her bag depending on the day. Ohio is a one-party consent state. She looked it up before she started. She wasn't breaking any law. She was trying to understand what was happening to her family. She did this for 2.5 years. In that time, she recorded 94 separate conversations. Some were innocuous. Some were nocuous. Some were, as she described them to me later, the kind of thing that made her cry on the drive home and then sit in the school parking lot collecting herself before she went inside to teach. I didn't know any of this was happening. What I did know, by the summer of 2021, was that my marriage felt different in a way I couldn't name. Nadine was present without being present. She cooked dinner. She came to our grandson's birthday party. She sat next to me at church. But there was a distance I couldn't close. When I tried to talk to her, really talk, she deflected with busyness or tiredness or a vague complaint about something I'd done wrong years ago. I started to feel like a visitor in my own home. Then I found the credit card. I was looking for a utility bill. I know that sounds absurdly mundane, but that's the truth. I was looking for a paper utility bill I'd set somewhere, and I found a statement I didn't recognize. A Visa card in Nadine's name. Not our joint card. Her card. With a balance of $28,000. Purchases dating back 4 years. A hotel in Scottsdale, Arizona. Another in Charleston. Furniture deliveries to an address in Dublin, Ohio. A suburb I had no connection to. Charges at a jeweler I didn't know. Charges at what appeared to be a divorce attorney's office. From 18 months prior, I sat down on the floor of my home office and I stayed there for a while. I want to tell you I immediately called a lawyer and got my affairs in order. That's not what happened. What happened is I put the statement back where I'd found it, finished the thing I'd been doing, made dinner, and didn't say a word. Because I needed to understand the size of what I was looking at before I reacted to it, and because some part of me still, even then, didn't fully believe what I was seeing. I hired a forensic accountant. Her name is irrelevant, but she was recommended by my own accountant and she was thorough. She spent 6 weeks going through every financial record she could access. What she found took another week to fully explain to me. Over approximately 5 years, Nadine had moved roughly $312,000 out of our shared assets. Some of it went through the joint account in transfers that were disguised as household expenses, renovations that didn't happen, medical bills that didn't exist. Some of it went through a line of credit she had opened against our home without my signature, which turned out to be possible because of a forged authorization. Some of it went to an investment account I didn't know existed, in her name alone. Some of it went to furnish and maintain an apartment in Dublin, Ohio, where a man named, and I'll just say it, where a man she had been seeing for at least 3 years was living, in a unit that my money was paying for. I won't tell you his full name. I'll tell you he's a 51-year-old salesman who knew exactly who he was involved with and what she was taking. I'll tell you that when my lawyer eventually contacted him, he expressed surprise, which fooled no one. I filed for divorce in February of 2022. Nadine's attorney was aggressive. That's their job, I understand that. And I don't hold the attorney personally responsible for the strategy. But the strategy was to claim that the transferred money was for legitimate marital expenses that I had simply not paid attention to, and that my neglect of our household finances was itself a form of abandonment that justified her current circumstances. The plan appeared to be to establish me as an absentee husband who'd left her alone for 30 years while he built his business. and to position the financial transfers as reasonable compensation for that abandonment. It was a coherent strategy. It might have worked. Then Iris asked the judge if she could say something. We were at the final hearing. I was sitting at the respondent's table. I was the respondent in my own divorce, which is one of those things you don't really process until you're sitting there. Iris was in the gallery. She had been there every day of the hearing, which was 3 days total, just sitting in the third row with her hands folded in her lap. She'd barely spoken during the proceedings. She had asked my attorney in advance whether she'd be permitted to address the court, and my attorney had said she could request it, but there were no guarantees. The judge, a woman who had, over 3 days, demonstrated that she was not interested in theater, looked at Iris and asked her to approach. Iris stood up. She was wearing a gray blazer she'd bought specifically for the hearing, she told me later, because she wanted to look serious without looking like she was trying too hard. She walked to the front of the courtroom and she said, "Your Honor, I have audio recordings that I believe are directly relevant to the contested claims in this case. I've had them authenticated. My father's attorney has copies. I'd like to request permission to play a portion for the court." Nadine's attorney objected. The judge overruled the objection. She looked at Iris and said she could proceed. What followed was 11 minutes of audio. I'm not going to reproduce every word here. What I would tell you is what those 11 minutes contained. There was a conversation between Nadine and the man in the Dublin apartment, recorded during one of Iris's visits when Nadine stepped outside to make a call and didn't realize Iris had followed partway down the driveway. In that conversation, Nadine discussed the timeline, her word, for when she planned to file, and specifically mentioned waiting until after certain funds had cleared. There was a conversation in which Nadine described the home equity line of credit as my insurance policy, and laughed at something her companion said in response. There was a conversation. And this one I had heard once, because Iris played it for me privately 2 weeks before the hearing, and I had to leave the room, in which Nadine spoke about me, about how I had always been simple and trusting, and how that made things easier. Not cruel, exactly. Something colder than gruel. Matter of fact. Iris stood at the front of that courtroom and she played 11 minutes of audio, and she did not look away from the judge once. When it was over, the room was very quiet. Nadine had been sitting rigidly at her table throughout. When the second recording ended, she pushed back her chair. Her attorney put a hand on her arm. She shook it off. She took 2 steps toward the aisle, and the bailiff stepped into her path and she stopped. She sat back down. The judge called a recess. During the recess, Nadine's attorney requested a meeting with my attorney. During that meeting, certain things were discussed that I'll describe by their outcomes. Nadine withdrew all contested claims. She agreed to a settlement that returned the documented transferred amounts to me, including the value of the Dublin apartment, which her attorney had been prepared to argue was a private asset. She agreed to the terms my attorney had originally proposed and which her team had spent 4 months fighting. The judge signed off on the settlement 11 days later. There's more, and I should be honest about it. The forensic evidence of the forged signature on the home equity line of credit was referred to the county prosecutor's office. That process is ongoing, and I'm not going to say more about it except that I have been told the investigation is serious and that I should expect it to take time. Time I have. What I did not have before any of this happened was evidence. Iris gave me evidence. My daughter spent 2.5 years quietly, carefully, without drama or confrontation or any acknowledgement from me that she was doing it, protecting me. She is 34 years old. She teaches 10th grade American history. She drives a 2018 Honda with a dent in the back bumper that she keeps saying she'll fix. She is, without question, the most extraordinary person I know. In the weeks after the hearing, I tried to find the right way to tell her what it meant to me. I took her to dinner, just the 2 of us, at a restaurant she liked. The kind of place with cloth napkins and a specials board and no TV over the bar. We ordered and I sat across from her, and I tried to say what I wanted to say, and I found I couldn't quite get there. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine and said, "Dad, I know." And she did. She always has. I've thought a lot in the months since about how this happened, not just the betrayal. I've had to make a kind of peace with the shape of it, even if I haven't finished yet. But how I let it happen. A lot of people, when I tell this story, want to make me a victim and leave it there. I understand that impulse, but there were things I could have seen if I'd been looking. And I wasn't looking because I was comfortable, and because trust, when it's complete, can make you blind. The apartment I now live in is a 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building in Westerville. It's smaller than I'm used to. I have a couch I picked out myself, which sounds small but isn't. On Friday evenings, Iris and Craig come over and we order from a Thai place down the street, and we watch whatever game is on. My son called last Sunday, like he always does. He asked how I was. I told him honestly. He said, "I'm glad Iris was there, Dad." I said I was too. There are mornings when I stand in my kitchen drinking coffee, and I think of our 31 years, the good ones, which were real, and the ones that weren't what I thought they were, which were also real. I'm 63 years old, and I am, strange as this sounds, starting over. Not in a broken way. In the way that happens when someone finally shows you exactly where you stand, and it turns out the ground, though different from what you expected, is solid. My daughter knew the truth before I did. She held it carefully for a long time, until the moment it could actually do some good. That's the kind of person she is. I don't think I'll ever be able to thank her enough. So I've stopped trying to find the words and started just showing up on Friday nights eating Thai food, watching the game, being her father, in whatever years I have left. It's not a small thing being someone's father. I understand that better now than I ever did before.